had the Lumix G80 for about a year, just over, and initially I was going to do a first impressions video not long after I got it, and never got around to it. So I've been using it this past week quite a lot more, so I thought I'd put something together. Just a few thoughts on it. Generally it's reasonably light, and I think I weighed it in at just over 500 grams for the body alone, and I have to say it feels even lighter than that, because the camera I use quite a lot, my kind of Micro Four Thirds go-to camera, is an Olympus EM1, and that feels a lot heavier. Although it's only about 70 grams heavier, it feels a lot heavier than that. So this, whilst it feels maybe a little bit kind of rubbery and plasticky, maybe it's good. It feels good in the hand. Part of the weight thing with the Olympus comparison is probably because this kit lens, the 12-60 on the G80, which is it's a 3.5 to 5.6 aperture, so it's not particularly fast. It's typical sort of kit lens, but the lens on my Olympus is the 12-40 Pro, 12-40 or 12-45, I can't remember, but it's the f2.8 lens, so that is a lot. That's a lot heavier. That's about 200 grams heavier than this lens, apparently. So it just generally, the Olympus feels kind of weightier. So ergonomics good generally on this, feels nice. One thing I'm not so keen on is I bought this camera mainly for video work, and the kind of the video start button, if you're using that as your start button for video, is quite heavily recessed and quite difficult to pick out. Maybe that's a good thing. Swings and roundabouts with all these things, because you don't want to be pressing the video button accidentally, blah blah blah. Menus, a lot of people complain about them on cameras generally. This has got a lot of options in the menus, a huge amount of options, but I think it's a very well laid out, clear menu to work your way around, so I like that. I also like having, you know, quite a lot of buttons and dials rather than having to go into menus too often. It does have a quick menu as well, and obviously touch screen, all that sort of stuff. So from a control perspective, I think they've done the best they, probably the best they possibly could. Pretty good. There are a few cons, as I mentioned. Video button, battery life. Initially I thought it was quite good. Now I don't think it's so good. The batteries aren't huge on this, in this thing, and I did buy a grip for it as well, and I don't think it's a Panasonic grip. I think it's just a kind of a third-party grip, but it does allow you to put another battery in there, which is pretty handy at times. So that's good, and it kind of makes up for the fact that the batteries aren't that strong, not that huge in this thing. So it does run the batteries down fairly quickly. I do find one of the things that does annoy me a little bit is the focus point. Because it's got a very sensitive touch screen, the focus point can be out of place sometimes without me even realising it. So I kind of, I get the focus point. Usually I have it in the middle, but it can end up right here along the bottom somewhere, and I'm guessing that's just partly handling or my nose or something touching the screen, and I end up with the focus point right down at the bottom of the screen here. And then when I'm looking at the screen to figure out where the focus point has gone, because it's not where I expected and the thing is focusing oddly, I can't see it because it's in amongst the other information that's displayed at the bottom of the screen. So that can be annoying, but I'm not really sure that there's a good way out of that. What is handy is that you can just pick up the focus point and drag it back across the screen to the middle, or you can recenter it using the left button and then the disc. So you can get there to easily, or fairly easily, recenter it. One of the big things about this camera, of course, is that the autofocus isn't great for video. It's okay for stills photography, I find, but for video, particularly if you're doing talking head stuff, it's going in and out of focus all the time. So manual focus for talking head video work, which I think you don't buy one of these expecting the autofocus in video to be great, because it just isn't. I have used this for motorsports, and whilst it's not as good as the EM1 Mark II, it probably is about on a par with the EM1 Mark I. So it's got a little bit of kind of lag in the EVF, which is annoying for motorsports, but you know, motorcycle racing is difficult for autofocus systems. I think generally it's hard work on them, and it's difficult to get something that's really, really good. You've got to have a really fast EVF refresh, and this it's not quite up to the same standard as the EM1 Mark II, but it's close. To be honest, most of the time it's pretty reasonable, but it's just not quite as good. If I didn't have the EM1 Mark II to compare it against, I'd probably think it was pretty reasonable. So over the last week, we've been away in Cirencester, and we had some weather. And it was because we had some weather that I found myself using this more, because I planned to make it a bit of a Fuji trip, and my XE1, XE2 are not weather sealed, so I took this along to do some video work and ended up using this most of the time, just because it's weather sealed, and it performed much better than I was expecting. So I'll show a few of the photos now as we go through, just a few of the street things and the like. And some of the things that impressed me were this lens has a good range. The 12 to 60 is good range, and it was pretty reasonable, I think, in terms of quality. Better than I expected anyway. The only thing it misses out on really is that shallow depth of field that you can get with the Olympus Pro kit lens, the 2.8. So I might give that lens a try on this camera as well. What I was impressed with was I shoot RAW all the time, and looking at the RAW images on the computer, the colours are much better than I was expecting, much nicer. And I'm just using the standard profile in the camera, so but yeah, they came out really well. I was really pleased with those. Pleased with the general handling, because it's relatively small and light. It's reasonably for this type of thing. It's moderately unobtrusive. It's not too, it's not huge like a big DSLR, and it's got a very quiet shutter. I will activate it now just so that you can... ready? There we go. That's very quiet, and it's a lot quieter than even the EPL8, which I had with me as well. That makes quite a clunk in comparison. So that's nice. It's nice to have something that's pretty inconspicuous when you're wandering about in town. So on the whole, I barely scratched the surface on the features, because, as I say, I bought this pretty much purely as a video camera, and I've enjoyed using it over this last week. I'm going to make sure I use it a lot more, and I will try out my Olympus lenses on this and see how we get on with those. So, all good, pretty much, apart from the cons. There are always some.